Picture yourself trudging through a dense, primordial wetland somewhere in what is now Western India. The air is thick with humidity, your feet sink into black mud, and the buzz of giant insects fills your ears. You stop for a moment at the edge of a shallow lagoon when the ground under your feet seems to ripple. At first, you think it's a trick of the light, but then the muddy water parts, and something the size of a train car glides past. It has no legs, and yet its muscular body moves with frightening grace. Its sheer length keeps going and going until it disappears under the murky surface. If your heart is racing just thinking about this, then you've just met Vasuki Indicus, a snake so long that comparing it to a bus hardly does it justice. This enormous serpent prowled the Indian subcontinent about 47 million years ago and has only now been brought back into the light. How did this giant remain hidden for so long? What sort of world did it inhabit? And how could a cold-blooded reptile reach lengths that make modern pythons look like garden hoses? To answer these questions, we need to dig deep, both literally and figuratively, into India's ancient swamps. But be warned, the deeper we go, the more surprising the story becomes. The skeleton in the coal mine. Our journey begins not in a jungle, but in a lignite mine in the Kutch district of Gujarat. In 2005, miners extracting brown coal unearthed some curious bones. They were massive vertebrae, the likes of which no one had seen before. At first glance, the workers assumed they belonged to a crocodile. After all, crocodiles were known from the region's past. But something about these bones didn't fit. They were wide, 11 centimeters across, and more cylindrical than the flattened vertebrae of a croc. For nearly 2 decades, the fossils sat in collections, puzzling researchers. It wasn't until 2024 that paleontologists Datta and Bajpai took a closer look and realized that this was no reptile we'd ever met. 27 vertebrae, some still in the exact position they'd held in life, told the story of an animal with a body at least as wide as your forearm. By comparing the bones to living and extinct snakes, the scientists estimated a minimum length of 10 meters. That alone would have made this the longest snake ever found in India. But when they ran the numbers using a different formula, the picture grew even wilder. The upper length estimates stretched toward 15 meters, longer than the average city bus and rivaling the famous Titanoboa from South America. One thing was certain, this snake was a bona fide giant. Naming a creature like this requires something special. Datta and Bajpai chose Vasuki after the mythical serpent who coils around the neck of Lord Shiva in Hindu lore. In the legends, Vasuki is powerful yet protective. In reality, Vasuki Indicus must have inspired awe and terror in equal measure. Just in case the name wasn't clear enough, the species epithet Indicus plants this creature firmly in the ancient Indian landscape. The bones came from sediments known as the Naredi Formation, which date to the Middle Eocene, around 47 million years ago, when India was still drifting northward on its collision course with Asia. Why were the bones of such a colossal creature hidden in a coal mine for nearly 20 years? And what secrets does this forgotten giant reveal about the world it once ruled? We'll get to that, but first, let's wrap our heads around just how massive this serpent really was. Measuring the monster. If you've ever seen a large python or anaconda at a zoo, you know they can be impressive. The longest reticulated pythons reach about 9 meters, but Vasuki puts them to shame. Using the dimensions of its vertebrae, researchers estimated its length using 2 different equations. The conservative estimate, roughly 11 meters, already placed it among the elite of giant snakes. The more generous calculation pushed its size up to 14.5 to 15 meters. That's roughly the length of 3 giraffes lying end to end. Imagine being wrapped up by that. But length is only part of the story. Vasuki's vertebrae suggest a body more than 40 centimeters thick at midsection. That translates to a snake weighing close to a ton. Imagine trying to lift the front bumper of a small car. That's what Vasuki might have weighed. Even more importantly, the bones are shaped like those of a constrictor, broad and round, not narrow and flattened. This indicates that Vasuki was built for strength, not speed. It was likely a slow-moving powerhouse rather than an agile racer. For perspective, the famous Titanoboa from Colombia, which lived about 10 million years earlier, is estimated to have been between 12 and 15 meters long. If the upper length estimates for Vasuki hold, then India's serpent rivaled or even surpassed Titanoboa. Whereas Titanoboa is thought to have been semi-aquatic, spending most of its time in rivers, Vasuki's vertebrae suggest a semi-terrestrial lifestyle. Think of it as a cross between an anaconda and a massive python, but even more formidable. Still, a big snake is just a big snake until you know where it lived and what it ate. To fully appreciate Vasuki's gigantism, we need to understand the world it inhabited, and that world couldn't have been more different from India today. A swampy greenhouse. When Vasuki slid through the mud, India was an island drifting in a global greenhouse. Average temperatures hovered around 28 degrees Celsius, meaning there was no winter cold to stunt reptilian growth. Humidity was oppressive, and much of coastal western India was covered by lush wetlands. The Naredi Formation, where Vasuki's bones were entombed, paints a picture of a backswamp environment. Shallow, sluggish water choked with vegetation. It wasn't quite open ocean, yet it wasn't firm land either. It was the sort of in-between place where giant reptiles thrive. Fossils from the same deposits reveal Vasuki's neighbors. There were long-snouted crocodilians, soft-shell turtles with shell spans like umbrellas, catfish large enough to swallow your arm, and even early whales, small, otter-like ancestors of today's leviathans. This menagerie tells us the swamp teemed with life, both aquatic and terrestrial. For a predator that ambushed from the water's edge, it was a buffet. The warm climate meant metabolic rates for reptiles were high. They could digest large meals and grow without the seasonal slowdown that limits modern snakes. Because Vasuki's bones show no special adaptations for life in deep water, scientists think it was semi-aquatic at best. It probably spent its time wrapped around tree roots and submerged logs, half hidden in reeds, waiting for something edible to wander too close. The environment was likely similar to the riverine forests that large anacondas inhabit today, but on a grander scale thanks to the greenhouse conditions. Warm, wet, and full of prey. Conditions perfect for breeding giant snakes. But being surrounded by potential food doesn't tell us how Vasuki caught its meals, or how it avoided becoming a meal itself. The next piece of the puzzle lies in its family tree and how that informs its behavior. King of the constrictors. Vasuki belonged to a group of snakes called madtsoiidae. This extinct family appeared during the age of dinosaurs and survived well into the Cenozoic era. Madtsoids ranged in size from small, meter-long species to giants like Gigantophis in North Africa and Madtsoia in South America. They all shared primitive characteristics. Their skulls lacked the highly flexible jaws of modern boas and pythons, and their bodies were often more rigid. But they did have something going for them: sheer mass and muscle. Without the benefit of venom or ultra-flexible jaws, a giant madtsoid like Vasuki would have relied on raw power. It probably hunted by stealth, ambushing animals at water's edge, latching on with dozens of backwards curving teeth, and quickly coiling its body around them. Once wrapped, it would tighten its coils, restricting blood flow to the brain and heart until the animal succumbed. This is exactly how modern boas and anacondas kill, and there's no reason to think Vasuki behaved differently. The difference lies in scale. A snake measuring 15 meters could take down prey few modern snakes would dare to approach. What exactly were its victims? The early whales from the Naredi Formation were roughly the size of German shepherds. A young whale blundering through reeds would have been an ideal meal. Crocodilians and turtles were also likely on the menu, though a fully grown croc might have been too risky. Large fish would have provided a rich protein source. There's even speculation that Vasuki might have occasionally hauled itself onto land to ambush terrestrial mammals. With a body that wide and powerful, dragging itself over mud and roots wouldn't have been difficult.
Importantly, there's no sign that Vasuki had venom. Instead, its vertebrae hint at a heavy, muscular body designed to overpower. After a big meal, it would have basked in the tropical sun for weeks, digesting slowly and growing ever larger. For smaller animals living in the swamp, there would have been nowhere safe, land or water. So, where did this giant come from, evolutionarily speaking? And what does it tell us about how snakes spread across the world? To answer that, we need to place Vasuki in the wider family of madtsoiids and look at their global journey. Snakes on a drifting continent. The discovery of Vasuki in India adds a new chapter to the story of madtsoiid snakes. Fossils of these serpents have been found in South America, Africa, Madagascar, and even Australia. That distribution hints that they originated when the southern continents were still connected as part of Gondwana. As the supercontinent broke apart, different lineages hitched rides on drifting land masses. India, for example, split from Madagascar and began its northward journey tens of millions of years before Vasuki lived. By the Middle Eocene, India was a sizable island continent, isolated but not completely cut off. Phylogenetic analyses place Vasuki close to Madtsoia pisdorensis, an earlier Indian species, and Gigantophis garstini, another giant from Egypt. This suggests that India retained its own lineage of madtsoids for tens of millions of years after it broke away from Gondwana. Vasuki may represent the culmination of that lineage, a giant that evolved while India was isolated, taking advantage of warm climates and abundant prey to reach unprecedented length. This also means that gigantic constrictors weren't unique to South America. Titanoboa may have hogged the headlines, but Vasuki proves that other continents produce serpents of similar, if not greater proportions. Whether these giants evolved independently or shared a common gargantuan ancestor remains uncertain. What's clear is that such size requires specific conditions: a warm, stable climate, plentiful prey, and little competition from mammals. But why did creatures like Vasuki vanish? If the climate was so good for reptiles, what changed to bring down these giants? And could anything like Vasuki ever return? Let's turn to the climate story behind snake giantism. Greenhouse giants and their fall. The link between climate and reptile size is well established. Cold-blooded animals grow larger when temperatures are high and constant. During the Middle Eocene, Earth experienced a prolonged greenhouse phase. Carbon dioxide levels were high, polar ice was minimal, and tropical conditions extended toward the poles. This allowed reptiles in many regions to flourish. In South America's Paleocene tropics, Titanoboa emerged. In India's Eocene swamps, Vasuki grew. They were products of their climates as much as their genes. But climates change. After the Eocene, global temperatures dropped. Seasonal variation increased. Wetlands shrank. As India collided with Asia, mountain building and monsoons altered rainfall patterns. Large reptiles require a lot of food and stable warmth. As those conditions disappeared, so did the giants. Madtsoids dwindled and ultimately went extinct. The last of their kind survived into the Pleistocene in Australia, but even they didn't approach Vasuki's size. Today's world is warming again, but the pace is rapid and erratic. Sudden climate shifts are more likely to drive species extinct than to foster giants. Modern anacondas and pythons show that snakes can still reach impressive sizes, but nothing like Vasuki's record. Without a return to an ancient greenhouse world over millions of years, snakes as long as buses will remain creatures of the past.
Conclusion. In the end, the bones pulled from a Gujarati coal seam reveal far more than the existence of a gigantic snake. Vasuki Indicus is a testament to how weird and wonderful Earth once was. It prowled a swampy paradise, grew longer than a bus and thicker than a telephone pole, and dominated a world that seems alien compared to today's India. Its discovery also reminds us that myths sometimes have roots in reality. The king of snakes wasn't just a legend, but a living, breathing animal that ruled its realm. Vasuki's story is also a cautionary tale. It flourished in a stable greenhouse climate, only to vanish when that stability faltered. As we alter our planet's climate, we should consider the lessons hidden in ancient bones. For now, though, take a moment to picture a 15-meter serpent sliding through a steaming swamp, its massive coils wrapping around unsuspecting prey. It's a scene from a bygone era, yet one that sparks the imagination and maybe a shiver down the spine.